So welcome and thank you for joining us here today, both in person at Monash University and on Zoom. I'm Professor Joanna Batstone from the Monash Data Futures Institute, and I will be your host and moderator for today's session. Before we start, I wish to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land we're gathered here today, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Welcome to this series of Monash conversations on AI and data science. This series of talks enable us to showcase examples of impactful AI and data science research conducted by our Monash University researchers, and we're very glad you've chosen to join us this afternoon. Today, we're in for a treat. We are very pleased to host three fantastic researchers from our Monash community. Dr. Michaela Prescott is a lecturer in the Department of Architecture at Monash University and a member of the Informal Cities Lab in the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture. Her interdisciplinary practice-based research relates to the urbanization of water and river systems, the impact of infrastructure on neighborhoods and communities, and the delivery and sustainability of community-based projects. Associate Professor Shanti Sumartojo is an Associate Professor of Design Research and a member of the Emerging Technologies Research Lab and the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture here at Monash University. She's conceptually grounded in human geography, and her interdisciplinary research follows an interest in how people experience their spatial surroundings, including design and digital technologies. And then our third speaker who's on Zoom with us today is Professor Lechner, who is joining us online from Indonesia. Alex is a landscape ecologist and also a professor who's teaching in the new Masters of Urban Design program at our newest campus, Monash University, Indonesia. And his research focuses on employing integrated socio-ecological approaches, spatially explicit modeling, GIS and remote sensing techniques to urban sustainability, conservation planning, and natural resource management. The Monash Data Futures Institute provides seed grant investments for interdisciplinary research projects. And today we'll hear from one of these projects that addresses the challenge of connecting broad geographic scale open access and big data from an array of different sources with detailed ethnographic approaches to understand and support the lived experiences of residents along the Citarum River in Indonesia. So it's an absolute pleasure to host our three speakers today, Michaela, Shanti, and Alex. And we're going to start today's presentation with Michaela. So please come and join me. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for having us. So Shanti and I are going to tag team on this presentation. I'll start off and then hand over to Shanti midway or thereabouts, and Alex will join us for questions. So it's a pleasure to be here today presenting some of the research that we received funding from the Institute for around the middle of last year. This research project for us was a real opportunity to bring together a group of people, some of which we had been working together with already and others who were new. So Shanti and I, for example, had co-supervised PhD candidates together, but never worked together on a research. Alex and I have to date never met in person, but get along really well. And this research project was the first thing that we've worked on together. And from this project, we've actually ended up co-supervising another PhD candidate who's joined our research lab. As you can see from the project team, we have quite a number of different researchers across different institutions who've been involved in the project, both at Monash Australia, Monash Indonesia, and also the University of Indonesia in Depok in Indonesia, of course, and through a more recent collaboration, another researcher at UNPAD, which is a university that's located near Bandung, which is where our research is sited. The research team has grown from our original group of project CIs to also include a group of research assistants who are helping us undertake the work. One of the really interesting things I think about this project is the way that it's embedded within a larger program of research, which is the Citarum Action Research Program, which is a project that's started out of a collaboration between the Monash Sustainable Development Institute and researchers from the Department of Architecture in Caulfield. And has grown out of an invitation from the West Java government to participate in a master planning process for river revitalisation. This particular research project identified I guess a gap in work that was being done as part of the larger project, and an opportunity to bring together data from different kinds of sources, as well as using different kinds of interdisciplinary methods. We saw a real opportunity for connecting together the lived experiences of residents to these broader scale land use changes that were occurring within the catchment, and the challenges of pollution, climate change, and flooding that communities were experiencing. So as I said, the seed funding for this smaller project has come from the Data Futures Institute, and has facilitated a new collaboration that sits within this larger program of work. The project proposed using these different interdisciplinary methods to create a range of different outputs. One is a video that brings together these lived experiences of residents that I've mentioned, and maps these into, I guess, a trajectory of catchment transformation that we see within the river. And through this explores the different kinds of stakeholder perspectives that these individuals might have, and how these are embedded within the challenge of river revitalisation, which the government has been contending with for decades, and it still remains a big issue. So in part, this investigation, as I said, is correlated to a master plan that we're involved in developing, and the team from the CARP project has been involved in developing. And so this video is a way of bringing to the forefront some of these perspectives from residents who might not always be able to participate in broader scale land use planning and revitalisation efforts. The other outputs that the project has been exploring is a multi-criteria GIS analysis study that uses spatial data to understand community resilience and vulnerability. And then these are seen to be complemented by a series of publications that we're also planning to produce. So I'd just like to, I guess, run through a little bit of what's been happening to date in the project. So as I said, the funding was awarded in June last year. And for us, even though the project is, I guess, nested within a larger project, we still had a lot of startup challenges to bring things together and set the work in progress. But the ethnographic fieldwork was completed earlier on this year, and we're in the process of bringing together the first draft of the film, which is a really exciting stage, because we're able to really see the opportunities to bring these diverse data sets together in one medium. So as we move towards the second half of this year, we've got an opportunity to launch the film concurrent to the master plan, which is being submitted to the West Java government, which is really exciting and I guess valuable opportunity to put the work of the team and the program into the spotlight that this project is, I guess, receiving more broadly within the West Java region, as a critical government project is also reaching its culmination at this time. And then the spatial development modelling, etc., is now coming to a fore as well. And there's some really exciting activities that our team has been working through, and I'll let Alex speak to those a little bit more later. So I just wanted to give a little bit of an insight to the film and how we've conceived it, and then Shanti will transition into some, I guess, more broader reflections on our experiences working together on this program. So the film is set up in five parts predominantly, and this I think is something new for all of us. None of us have produced a film before. We've partnered with a local filmmaker in Bandung in Indonesia, and I think one of the really interesting parts of the experience for us has been the interdisciplinary nature of working together and conceptualizing the storyline of the film and thinking through the interrelationships between the stories of the community members that we've spoken to through the ethnographic film, the ethnographic fieldwork, and how their experiences can be transposed and interrelated with different changes that are being observed within the landscape more broadly. By connecting the experiences of these communities to sort of the broader challenges of river revitalisation, we're able to point to the role of the really important role of waste management and water supply and sanitation for these communities as well. And I think it allows us to also at the same time speak to the way that comprehensive or synchronized programs of change within communities and areas like this can potentially start to resolve some of the tensions that exist in other programs and projects that have been implemented to date, which are often, I guess, directed towards solitary challenges rather than thinking about how all of these different circumstances are actually part of a broader environmental condition.
How's that? Okay, yeah. Thanks, Michaela, and thank you, John and the DFI for having us here. This has been, as Michaela said, a really interesting project to work on. My responsibility within the project was to conceptualize and pull together the ethnographic research that's the backbone of the film, the documentary film, which is one of the main outputs of the project. In the lab where I sit, the Emerging Technologies Research Lab, we have a filmmaking practice. Actually, we have a documentary filmmaker that works with us there. So while I've never produced a film, I've kind of been alongside the processes a bit and use video a lot in my own work. So this was a really interesting opportunity to push this a bit further. So the logic of using the film was that we could take people's lived experience of issues with sanitation and water quality and supply, the channelization of the river, and use that as the kind of organizing logic of how to tell the story of this site. And so we're kind of overlaying, and this, in fact, we just got the rough cut of the documentary today, like just about half an hour ago. And so our next job is to work out how to overlay the background data. So the geophysical and hydrological data that's been generated already as other parts of the project, within other parts of the project. And to work out how we're going to bring that together also in the publications that we're going to do. So we have an idea of how to do it visually through the use of motion graphics and stuff like that in the film, but it's a totally different challenge altogether to bring ethnographic material together with that sort of modeling data. So that's what we intend to do, is to use vignettes from participants in the ethnographic part of our study to shape the parameters of a multi-criteria analysis of GIS data, which Alex is leading. So the the conversation between the ethnographic material and the other data is a way to kind of sort of sense check or ground truth the other sort of data, the hydrological, the geophysical, and the other GIS data, to make sure that it makes sense, right? To make sure that we're telling a story that makes sense, not just for us as researchers or as master planners or producers of a master plan, but also makes sense for the people on the ground who actually kind of live in these places. And so it's a way of, these vignettes help us bridge lived experience and much larger scale data sets that we can use to make sense of the environment. And the intention is that by bringing together, in publications, bringing together ethnographic vignettes with big data, that we can draw out insights that can be transferred to other settings, right? So because when you do ethnographic research, you're not working at scale, but you are working to develop insights, right? And concepts that can travel to other, that can scale up and travel to other settings. Okay. So this is one of the photographs I took. So I was able to go in November, which was an amazing opportunity to have a look at the site, to meet all the researchers, to meet some of the community leaders, and just to have a little chitty chat with people in the community too, to get a sense of, what people's lives are like, and yeah, what it's like to be on this river. And as a qualitative ethnographic researcher, for me, it's absolutely vital to actually be in the place and get a sense of it in order to get to have my own understanding that I can then build these other forms of data onto. So we really think that this kind of qualitative ethnographic work has an important role to play in connecting these different scales of experience, right? So the individual scale of the individual person, the village scale experiences, to this catchment or the subcatchment area. And so the idea is the DFI has enabled us to do a pilot project that can test how we can scale up to different spatial and policy interventions at different levels. So whilst we are focusing, at least in this part of the project, on the local level of the 2 villages, we do hope that we can draw insights that can scale up to those other scales. And this multi-criteria analysis of the GIS material is going to help us make those sort of jumps across the scales. And Alex will be able to speak more to that because that's more his area, but we are interested here in community resilience and vulnerability, and GIS is going to help us identify, we hope, where those interventions might be most effective. So the kind of interventions that appear, for example, in the architectural work, the master planning work that Michaela and people in architecture are leading. So it's basically a really complex picture that I'll admit we are working out as we go. That's really the great opportunity of pilot funding, and the great pleasure of the project is to work out how these very different ways of understanding this same environment can knit together and give us insights that any one approach would not be able to give us. Okay, and so you ask yourself, why even try? Because it is hard, right? It's really challenging. And as you could see from Michaela's previous slide, there's a big team. We're operating in 3 languages, right? In English, in Indonesian, and in Sundanese, which is the local language in that part of West Java. So that meant that when we were organizing research assistance, we had to make sure that everything was translated into 2 languages, and that, we were talking with people in the right language, that our research assistants could cover all of that. Here's a couple more images that I took on my visit. So there's some men fishing by the river, and then the image below is a local enterprise, a small enterprise, like a home-based business. The woman bakes. She told us that she went to the bakery and tasted something and thought, I can do better than that. And so she started this kind of local industry. But as you can see, she's working on in her house, basically, and has this sort of small production line set up. But it gives you a sense of, that kind of insight you can't get unless you go and talk with people and spend time with them sitting on the floor of their house. And eating delicious buns. But the reason we wanted to tackle this is because we think that lived experience is super important. We're not unique in thinking that. That's very much, a lot of research is especially impact-driven research is very interested in lived experience. But we wanted to reach a really wide variety of audiences and key decision makers. And so that's the logic of using documentary film, is that it's a accessible way to tell us a very complex story and to reach a very wide range of audiences. We know that different kinds of decision makers and stakeholders respond to different forms of information, right? And so if you're talking to a range of different potential funders, or if you're talking to governments or multilateral organizations, or people in the community who you want to be participating in this sort of ongoing work, you need to communicate in a range of ways. Certainly, some forms of phenomenon, such as lived experience, are always going to be reflected better with ethnographic methodologies, for example, rather than only looking at GIS work or only looking at spatial analysis that architecture can do. And lived experience really communicates powerfully about why the research matters, the potential that it offers to people, the kind of impact that we're interested in and that we're driving for. And we really believe that we need, stories, and storytelling is a part of how we can reach, we can do really impactful research, certainly really engaging research. And the pilot project really gave us an opportunity to think through how big data and AI could be woven together with other forms of data, and kind of directed at big development agencies and governments to try to address these really complex problems. So as I said, for us, we are working it out as we go, but we hope at the end, and this was, what we pitched to Joanna and DFI, is that at the end, we'll have a methodology for how to knit these things together, and we'll have some learnings that we can then share, not just about this project, but also about that really complex interdisciplinary weave. Okay, so that's what Michaela and I wanted to tell you about. It's very much work in progress. The film we're hoping will be done in August. Michaela's on a timeline, so we're hoping to get it done before that inevitability occurs, that happy inevitability. Alex is our GIS expert, so he can answer any questions like that, but I'm happy for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Shanti. So don't go too far because you're going to be up here asking questions. So I'm going to suggest that we use this microphone as the roving microphone around the room. And then we'll use this one for responding.
Hello. Yes, we can use this one. We'll share. Yeah.
So I have a number of questions. I thought that was fascinating, and I would have loved to have been in your fieldwork with you. And I had the pleasure of visiting Monash, Indonesia just over a month ago. So I have met Alex.
Unlike me.
Although this is the first time that Michaela and I have met in person as opposed to in the Zoom world. So it's been great to have you both. Let me open up and see if there are any questions in the room here to kick off. And for those of you who are on Zoom, thank you for joining. Please put up your hand if you have a question you want to ask. We'll monitor the chat as well to see if there are questions coming up. But I have one sort of a starter question. And again, Alex, we'd love to get Alex involved in this conversation as well. But you've talked about the fact that this was a program of work as part of a bigger project. We've brought a new team together. You've been building your team. You've been hiring research assistants. What have some of the challenges been in bringing all of that together? And as you've worked through this over the last 6, 9, 12 months, what have you learned? And if you were to do it all again, are there things that you would do differently?
I can start.
Yeah, you start.
Yeah, I think there was a fair bit more of the startup that needed to happen than maybe I anticipated. Certainly, even though we're collaborating between faculties at Monash, so MSDI, MATA, and then Monash Indonesia. There aren't always particularly streamlined processes for setting up things like agreements and the partnerships that were really necessary to even be able to, share the seed funding between partners so that they could start hiring the research assistants and doing the work. So that was something that I think slowed us down a little bit at the start and meant that we weren't able to begin some of the preparatory work in country, like visiting the research site together, and the ethnographic fieldwork maybe as quickly as we'd originally anticipated in our timelines. Also, despite me having worked in Indonesia now for coming up to 10 or 11 years, the Indonesian government had recently revisited its ethics procedures and research permitting procedures. And so we were navigating a new system there in parallel to the Monash procedures here. So I think those kinds of things, are often maybe the startup aspects that you don't necessarily put too much mind to early on in a project, but certainly took a little bit more time than we'd maybe thought that they would. I think the research collaborations have actually developed really well from my perspective. I think despite many of us not having necessarily worked together before, our shared interest and passion was something that enabled us to develop a really good rapport. And that's been, I think, a real asset to the project team and the generosity of research partners in sharing, discussing, debating ideas and different ways that we could approach the challenges that we'd set forth with has been really, really fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually think that the rapport of the research team is what has enabled it to work, because if we weren't, because it is, as I said, 3 languages, 2 time zones, 3 faculties, Monash Indonesia, 2 Indonesian universities, other Indonesian partners at the village level and at the community level. So, if we weren't, so maybe maybe another way to put that sort of startup cost is that allowing space for that rapport to build in a way, because we were a bit slowed down in the beginning by trying to get things organized. We had to organize different kinds of research permits and stuff, which took a really long time because we were working through the bureaucracy. But that did give us time to build a rapport. So I think the way I would say it is that in setting up a project like this, giving that space to breathe and that space to happen, like that's part of the work, right? That's part of the work you have to do. That's not ancillary to it. So I guess I would just not only allow enough time, but actually say, okay, we need to develop a rapport for a complex project like this to work. So let's actually make that part of the work plan. Yeah, rather than think, being grateful it happened by accident. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm keen to bring Alex into the conversation as well. So Alex, as you think about this, you're in Indonesia. Most of us online and in the room here are here in Australia. What's it been like for you collaborating globally with a team that perhaps doesn't know as much about Indonesia as you do? How's that collaboration worked for you? And as you've thought about the work accomplished to date, how well has that really gone? For us within the Monash Data Futures Institute, I think this is the first project that we had in collaboration with Monash Indonesia. So we know there have been some growing pains in getting that set up. But I'm really interested to hear, Alex, from your perspective of how's it felt and what is it like being distant from Monash headquarters here in Australia, and any guidance back to us in terms of how we should be thinking about collaboration in this very international world.
Thanks for your question. I think that the project has gone very well, given all these complexities that you've heard. I must say, I think actually both Michaela and Shanti already are very knowledgeable, are more knowledgeable on Indonesian than myself. perhaps not my some of my other colleagues who are part of the group, like Alias Widita and Fitro, who's our research associate. I think, yeah, I think given the challenges, I think it's gone very well. So I'm not sure if I have any learnings yet. I think there are interesting elements, positive elements of this being the Citarum project being something that existed before Monash Indonesia even begun. Was, I guess, a sparkle in someone's eye, in our Vice Chancellor's eye. So I think in that way, it's been a great experience in that Monash Indonesia has been able to participate in, you know, an ongoing body of research. And what we've been able to do, especially with this, so just to say, we at Monash Indonesia, I think one of the strengths we definitely have is sort of in the data science, in this sort of very quantitative approaches. You know, 2 out of our 5 programs are data science based, cybersecurity and data science, and many of the people within the urban design program have very data focused perspectives. So in a nice way, this project has been very complementary in terms of bringing the various disciplines together. So I don't think there's been massive challenges. I think the challenges are perhaps more academic in terms of these questions around how can quite vastly different disciplines, from, you know, ethnography to data science and GIS type approaches, how they can communicate and talk together, which is also one of the reasons it's exciting.
Yeah,
so hopefully
thanks.
I answered that.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. We've got a question in the room here that I might turn to.
Hi, beautiful project. My question relates to, I guess, a little. I'm waiting with much anticipation on the the documentary. How did you decide? Were there complications in, or any issues in deciding what to bring out of the data set to put into the documentary, and how that translated across? You know, in what way did you choose to do that?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question. I'll start, and then you can edit and correct as we go. So I guess, like, just in terms of how we kind of did the ethnographic aspect of the project, it was we knew that there were some particular kinds of issues. It was very organic, I guess, is what I'm about to say. It was very iterative. So we knew that there were some issues that were ongoing issues that were going to be addressed through other aspects of the project that we wanted to look at ethnographically as well. And those were sanitation and water quality, floods and droughts also, so water levels, water scarcity or floods, and waste management. So we knew from existing research that Michaela and others in her team have been doing that those were 3 things that we wanted to look at. And so when I went in November, those were the things I kind of had in my head. So there were existing projects to look at, and also people to talk with about those 3 things in particular. And so from that process, I then decided with the team of research assistants and translators and stuff that I was working with, okay, these are the types of stories that we want to find out more about. These are the kinds of people that we want to talk to about those things. And then they went and spoke to people and checked in with us. And we said, oh, we'd really like to hear more about this or more about that. So we had a kind of a organizing logic of those 3 kind of problem areas, I guess, that we were really interested in finding out more about the lived experience of those things. And then Michaela and her team were also across some of the data sets that have been generated in earlier phases of the project, particularly by colleagues at University of Indonesia. And then Alex's material was able to sort of come in on top of that. And so we sort of kind of built it up iteratively and in a layered way as well. Is it Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I was going to say the only challenge I think that we're having now is editing ourselves down.
Yeah.
The filmmakers have come back to us and said, "Oh, well, you've kind of given us enough material and ideas for something that's 2 or 3 times longer than what we're supposed to be producing." And so it's I think that's our one of the challenges in the next little while to think about. How do we use these different data sets to complement and enrich each other, but still tell, I think, tell the story in a concise way. And I think it's it is something that we're working through. We've just, as Shanti said, received the first kind of rough cut of everything together, and it's now going to be a process of looking and reviewing, how well does that meet our expectations of the story that we're trying to bring out, and how do we maybe revisit some of the data sets that we've got to look at what they can add or tell in a different way alongside the ethnographic material.
I just, if I could actually just want to, I do want to acknowledge the filmmakers in Indonesia. It's this great group called Exprosa, who are based in Bandung, who we've been working with. And they have a background in doing work on questions of sustainability and on doing kind of social justice focused work. So they are absolutely members of the team as well. So I really want to acknowledge them and their input. And I guess I also want to say that we have quite distinct audiences in mind for the different outputs, right? So for the academic outputs, of course, we're speaking to a particular academic audience, and then we're working out even how we shape that in a disciplinary way, so who we're going to be speaking to. But the documentary film has 2 versions. There's a short version, which is a way to kind of raise the profile of the project so that we can speak to perhaps an expanded group of stakeholders in the project. And then there's a longer version that is more ethnographic, perhaps, that's like more of a research output, but that's also intended to speak to a general audience of international stakeholders who want to know more about the project. So that question that you asked about how did we form up the way we layered that also very much had that kind of audience in mind. Yeah.
Thank you very much, David. Delightful to learn about this. Really excited to see the actual production. Maybe I was interested in the surprises, to the degree you can say that may have come as you looked at combining all this information, and just around maybe 2 points. What surprised maybe on the ecosystem, if there was one, like just learning or something interesting, and then like your interactions with the people of Bandung and using AI and data and just working with the local people. Any interesting surprises or comments that came out of your experience? I'd love to hear about that.
I guess the first thing I would say is that we're still very much in process of working with this data. So I'm not sure that I could identify a surprise. One of the things that I found interesting in the ethnographic work was that this part of this tributary had been channelized 10 years ago, or
12, maybe 12, 13 now.
Yeah. So more than a decade ago. And there were, for some people, it was so older people in the village who remembered it before it was, so when it's channelized, the water moves faster, obviously, but it's also easier to keep clean, and there's not oxbows where rubbish accumulates, et cetera, et cetera. That's incredible simplification of decades and decades of collective work. But anyway, that's it, basically. But when you talk to the people in the village and you say, what was it like when you were a kid, right? Because often people think about the past in order to kind of, think about aspirations for the future. When I was a kid, I was able to swim in the river. I could go fishing with my friends after school. It was clean, et cetera, et cetera. But what I found really interesting is that there were these multiple stories were told about the change of channelization. And some of those stories were kind of negative in that, you know, there used to be these beautiful oxbows and now the river will run so fast that you can't swim in it, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then other stories where it's so much cleaner now. It's, you know, the floods are under control in a way that they, you know, it floods less often, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no one story, and what lodges in people's memories and therefore in their imaginations about what the river could be is also really complex in terms of its relationship to changes to that, I mean, effectively built environment, right? Because that's been engineered. So that kind of, I mean, you always know that you're going to get a multiplicity of stories, but that basic kind of main infrastructural change could be perceived by different people in such a variety of ways. Like that kind of, you know, that can be quite confounding when you're thinking about a causal relationship between a change to the environment and, you know, changes to people's lives, for example. So I found that really interesting. And this was, I know Bandung quite well because I lived there in the 90s, but this was my first time in this part of West Java. So it was, yeah, really interesting to hear how people's kind of memories of the time before were so varied. Yeah, and it's certainly changed a lot since when I lived there as well.
And I mean, maybe just a quick addition. For me, one of the interesting things that comes out of being able to trace these lived experiences is understanding how things like climate change are potentially affecting the way in which they practice agriculture and having flow-on effects to, for example, their incomes and the opportunities that their families have. And these are things I think that, you know, with the mapping and modelling that Alex and his team are doing, we're able to then connect back to that larger story of land use change and phenomenon such as flooding, etc., and how that's affecting the landscape and the community. And for me, that's really interesting, you know, opportunity as we start to bring things together. But as Shanti said, we're still kind of in the midst of it. So there's probably a lot more for us to learn.
Is there time for me to add something?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add something like a real practical challenge, I think, that came out when we actually started the project. You know, when we originally proposed it, we imagined it to be much more dynamic between the ethnography and the data analysis, but the timelines are very difficult. So one thing that was you mentioned, I think Shanti mentioned, you know, this change over time. In our minds, when we were proposing it, we were imagining a series land cover maps showing the change over time that could then be used within these ethnographic interviews to triangulate some of the interviews. But there are just such challenges in trying to match timelines because of the very different you know amount of time it takes to do such analyses and match it within the short period of the project. In a way, I think the final product, having an understanding of all the possible products that we can create and how they can be matched with some of the ethnography on the ground, will be a really great output. So in the future, you know, we're much more ready to go, okay, we'll need a series of land cover change maps as soon as we hit the ground with ethnographic data, for example, the ethnographic analyses. So that is one of the learnings I think we've kind of worked out. It takes a while and just to match the different timelines of those different elements.
That's the next project, Alex.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we've developed lots of next project ideas, haven't we?
Questions from the room here, Bernd.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. It's really interesting. You said in the beginning that one of your ultimate goals in terms of what impact this could actually have is influencing development agencies, policymaking, and so on and so forth. So I'd be really interested in your views on the kind of the comparative roles that qualitative, quantitative data, really big data versus and statistics versus ethnographic data play when it comes to that level.
Well, we know that stories are really important for convincing people to to help participate in solving problems. I mean, that's sort of been shown in impact research, that storytelling is important. Stories are how you move people, right? Stories are how you get to the heart and not just to the head. So I feel that that's one of the really powerful ways we can work together, is that we can use stories and we can use lived experience. That's right at the center of lived experience is right at the center of impactful research, and ethnography is one way that you can get that. So I don't think that one is better or worse, but I think that they can work really powerfully together. And that, I mean, to be frank, is an open question of the best way to do that. I mean, but between us, we're still working that out. But I absolutely think, you don't just convince people through big data or through statistics alone, because you're appealing to a cognitive part of them, right? But if you're telling a story, so for example, the woman who I had the photograph of, who had the bakery, the kind of small enterprise bakery, right? So the size of her business is limited by how much she has to spend on buying water, because she can't use the water that comes, the water supply, right? She has to buy bottled.
She doesn't have a piped water supply. This village doesn't have piped water supplies currently, so they rely on groundwater, and the groundwater quality, it's not great. It's polluted, and it's also they're suffering drought, so it's also in itself not reliable. And so often, for a lot of those kind of daily activities, they're buying water, which is much more expensive.
So we can tell a data-driven story about groundwater quality over time, about flood levels, about the sinking of wells and how the water table goes down. We can tell that kind of story, but we need another kind of storytelling to say, Ibu so-and-so is, she has this small business that she's starting, she wants to make enough money to send her children to university. She's working with her family members, but she'd really like to hire someone so that she can expand, work in a proper workshop, not be working on the floor of her house. So we need that story, as well as the geophysical, the hydrological modeling that explains to us what's happening to the water table, and why the water quality is so poor and why she has to spend so much money on water. But we need both of them to understand what the problem is. The problem is one of people's real lives, people's real lived experiences, not just a problem of water quality. Yeah.
And in a way, I think a lot of solutions are informed by both the technical design aspects, as well as those lived experiences. And it's often the lived experiences that are contributing just as much to which technical solutions may be most appropriate for a particular community, given their own environmental conditions.
And just quickly, can I add, I think on a practical level, when we're doing, we've got lots of social, ecological, environmental conservation and, wastewater, lots of different issues described by different proxies, different data sets. And in a way, we can't, quantitatively ground truth every single one of these, but instead, using this ethnographic data, we can kind of ground truth this more complex, larger socio-ecological story that we tell with the data. So I think it has a really, the ethnography can ground truth our data as well. So I think there's a huge role in that way.
Thank you. Do we have one last question from the room, or maybe someone online has a question? I'm not moderating the chat, so do we have a question online? So I have a question. I mean, I'd love to see this movie when it's done. And obviously you have a series of intended audiences, both perhaps it sounds like a shorter version and then a longer version of this documentary you're putting together. So when it's finished, how do we see it?
So when's it's going to be launched in?
So the master plan soft launch is the end of August, and at the moment we're working with Alex and other colleagues in Indonesia to identify how to undertake the launches of the film in Indonesia. So we're hoping to do that in sort of September and October.
Yeah.
And potentially have one event in Bandung in the community, as well as one at Monash, Indonesia.
And maybe here as well.
And here as well.
Well, it would be great to see it here as well. If there's any way the Institute can help you in thinking through how best to socialize and publicize the work, then please let us know.
Great.
Great.
Yeah, we haven't even got that far yet.
No, I mean, I think we're all really interested in
But
the
it's a good
journey,
reminder. Yeah.
the journey you've been on.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. It's really been delightful. I am going to bring this to a close, but I'm also conscious that we've got some new faces that have joined us today in this series, this Monash Conversations on AI and Data Science. We've opened up this series of lectures this year to include an external audience because the stories are so great. We didn't want to just restrict these lectures to a Monash only audience. So for those of you who have joined us and don't have a Monash affiliation, we're really glad you were able to join us today. But that also then brings me to, we'd love to see you again. And so for those of you who haven't discovered us in the Monash Data Futures Institute before, you can sign up. If you're a Monash person, you can sign up to be an affiliate of the Monash Data Futures Institute. And that's a way for you to learn information about the events we sponsor, to get engaged with some of our seed grant programs, and to work with some of our PhD students and research fellows. And so for those of you at Monash, I'd encourage you to sign up and join us and come along for another one of our events. For those of you who have joined us from outside Monash, we're really pleased that you've joined us today. You can also sign up to receive news about the Institute and the events. And my colleague Vijay is putting up a couple of QR codes in the screen at the moment, and I have to make sure I read the color coding correct. So on the left, the Monash staff, if you want to scan that QR code, that should take you to an enrollment form to sign up as an affiliate of the Institute. The one on the right is for those of you who are external to Monash, and if you sign up here, that then enables us to send you information about news and events and invite you to lectures like this in the future. And you can subscribe to more information about the Institute. So we'd love for you to sign up. We're also really interested in your feedback on these events. We've been running a number of different lecture series over the last couple of years. And we love getting feedback. We'd love to hear how you experience the event, both from an operational side and a content side. But we're really interested in understanding what else would you like to hear about? What you've heard today is a research project through the seed grant program that we sponsor through the Institute. And we've got many other examples of projects like this that we could bring into an audience like this. But we'd like to hear from you. And we'd also be very keen if any one of you in the room here wants to volunteer and come and tell us what you've been working on from a research agenda perspective. One of our missions within the Data Futures Institute is to share the work that we have going on at Monash. Hopefully what you've heard today is it's very interdisciplinary, different backgrounds, different perspectives, different languages, different countries, but all grounded through this notion of data science and AI for social good. And I think that came out loud and clear in the presentation that we had today. So I really enjoyed the discussion. I hope you all did too. And we hope that we'll see you again in one of our future events. For those of you who are here with us in the room, we do have some refreshments planned as we conclude today. For those of you on Zoom, I'm sorry we can't ship the refreshments to you, but please join us in person next time. And Alex, thanks for joining us from Indonesia, and you have to let us know when you next visit Australia so that we can reciprocate some of the hospitality that I was shown when I was visiting Monash, Indonesia. So thank you very much to our three speakers, Michaela, Shanti, and Alex. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. We've had a great turnout for this discussion. It's great to see a full room here and to see so many on Zoom. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.